So our next session, we have three speakers. Our first speaker is Fiona Regan. Fiona works with the School of Chemical Sciences, DCU, be careful of that, and a director of the DCU Water Institute. So Fiona, if you could take the podium and give us your presentation. I believe there's cocktails for us, everyone.
Yes, stay for cocktails, everybody. And when I spoke to Lorraine about the project a while back, I was really interested, and I wanted to tell her all about the misconnected observations that we had, and she was kind of saying, no, we don't want to know about that. And now I know why, because the story that we just heard before the break is really excellent work, operational work that we never hear about. And so my little paddleboarding incident, seeing a washing machine output coming into the River Liffey, is not important. It was to us, but now I realise the real stuff that's happening. So thank you, and thank you for the invitation to speak about the cocktail of chemicals that we find in our surface water. And I've been working in this space for the guts of 20 years. And I have a real interest in...
Mute the microphone for the people on Teams. Oh, it is on.
Okay, testing, 1, 2. So it's not moving on for me. It's just not moving on for me. How do I get rid of that thing there? No, this one here. This one. No.
Sorry.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks a lot. And I'll try and keep to 15 minutes just to get people back on track. So I'm just going to talk about the challenges, the emerging challenges and the policy landscape. Literally a cocktail of chemicals, some monitoring data from our own work, and looking at some work that we've done on effects. So I've, as an environmental scientist back in the 1990s, I was a real fan of Rachel Carson, and if any of you haven't read the book Silent Spring, please do, bring it on your holidays. It's a real eye-opener, and it's as relevant today as it was then. So I'm going to talk to you about emerging contaminants. Europe puts out all these amazing terms. Emerging contaminants are those pollutants of growing concern. In other words, that they don't really have all the monitoring data, the information that, let's say, the priority substances would have from our Water Framework Directive list of substances. And they come from our everyday use, our pharmaceuticals, personal care products, everything that we use, everything that we wash off ourselves, everything that we put down those drains and toilets and that we just heard about. Everything that we use, sunscreens as well. And I suppose really what all of this work really that we do is looking at is how do we design a way of reducing use of chemicals where we don't really need them, and to achieve what we call a toxic-free environment under the Zero Pollution Action Plan. So the European Green Deal has a Zero Pollution Action Plan, which is part of this legislation, and in that it has a huge aim of a toxic-free environment, which I'm always a bit concerned about, because once you measure what's in the water, it's hard to see that you can reach zero pollution. We know that wastewater treatment plants are a huge source of pollutants coming into our surface waters, and no less the River Liffey, where we do a lot of our work. And we know also that legislation coming down the tracks, which is looking at agglomerations of over 100,000 PEs, will require greater treatment to remove these emerging contaminants of concern. And that is going to increase the cost of treatment massively. So what is a chemical cocktail? We know from reading the news, if any of you tune into The Guardian, you'll see every single day rivers in the UK being brought to court local authorities or agencies being brought to court because of breaches of pollutants coming into those waterways. And I suppose what's important from our perspective is up to now we measure priority substances, but what we don't know is what else is there, and we don't know the combined risk of these chemicals. And so we're really at the moment maybe looking at the effects based on our quality index or Q index, but now we need to really be looking at monitoring of specific chemicals, groups of chemicals, pharmaceuticals, personal care products, to really look at what the occurrence is, but also what the effect is. The effect on the ecology, and we're very interested obviously in biodiversity, and we know these cocktails have an impact on biodiversity. Just to show you some of the challenges that I have, and this is from the literature, where when you're doing analytical chemistry and you want to try and compare across different labs across the world, the sensitivity of those methods doesn't always match. You can see some of the box plots there where the minimum and the maximum limits of detection vary quite a lot. And this is because of instrumentation, it's because of the user, but it's because also of the sample matrix. So the matrix issues with many of these chemicals, for example, antibiotics, are really challenging. We know, for example, from measuring sulfamethoxazole, which we are seeing is a widely used antibiotic, often used in combination therapies, is widely found in surface waters and through a cocktail effect can have effects on biota. So those but also it does have issues in relation to the matrix effects because it likes to bind very, very tightly to a matrix. I put this slide up at a conference recently, an EPA conference, and some of the questions, it was kind of, tut-tutted and said, well, these kind of chemicals are just naturally occurring. These phenols naturally occur, which is true. However, if we want to, realistically look at the challenge of zero pollution and achieving zero pollution and non-toxic environment, we need to address the reality that our anthropogenic sources of pollution are there. So yes, this is a GC, gas chromatographic measurement of the River Liffey at a number of sites over a number of days, taking into account a rainfall event. We are seeing many of the naturally occurring phenolic compounds, but we're also seeing chemicals that shouldn't be there. So people are denying the fact that our rivers are polluted. Okay. So I'm just going to show you some data from studies that we've done on phthalates, PFAS, of course, pharmaceuticals during the COVID pandemic, and some pesticides. So phthalates are plasticizers, essentially, that are added to plastics. They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. They're on the surface of desks to protect them. They're on, flexible coatings. They're inside our cans. They're really, everywhere in the environment. We know that from risk studies that they do display estrogenic effect. They're endocrine disruptors. Many have been banned. Our study involved the measurement of what we call the parent phthalates or diesters, but also involved looking at what we call the breakdown products or metabolites of some of these diesters. They're called monoester compounds. And these can be indicators when we measure them in urine or in influent wastewater treatment plants. They can be indicators of the consumption or exposure of the human. Because in Ireland we currently don't do human biomonitoring studies. We hope that this obviously will change. There was one, Democophase was one that we were involved with. But this is an interesting indicator, the monoesters of phthalates. This is a simple analytical method, just shows six monoesters that we measured. And just here is the data that we got. So in each of these slides, we're showing different times of the year, at different catchments. So we have rural, we have urban in the middle, we have suburban, and we see the occurrence of the parent phthalates in our surface waters. And we're just, that band in the table shows where we fit in terms of the occurrence in the rest of Europe and the world. Actually, there's South African and Korean data in there as well. So the data, while the graphs are small, apologies, the data shows that we're picking up these parent compounds. But more interestingly, I suppose, is that we're picking up the monoesters. In other words, we're picking up in the influent of the wastewater treatment plant the occurrence of these monoesters. So in other words, people have consumed the parent phthalates in some way, daily use, and then they're excreting, and we're measuring these in the influent. So it's a good indicator of exposure in terms of plasticizers in influent, using influent as an indicator. Taking an example of pharmaceuticals, and sorry, this isn't it's a PowerPoint rather than it's a PDF rather than a PowerPoint. So this is just a summary of what we found in terms of pharmaceuticals. We did a large survey over about 4 years to measure pharmaceuticals in surface waters, and this is the results that we found for the River Liffey. And this graph shows the detection frequency during the COVID period, the detection frequency of the target pharmaceuticals. So you'll see that, for example, sulfamethoxazole was found in all samples, venlafaxine was found in 80% of samples, diclofenac, the famous diphenol, diclofenac, and gabapentin, and metformin being a heart medicine, trimethoprim. Many of these widely used pharmaceuticals that we're excreting back into our wastewater treatment plants that are coming back out of the untreated are entering our surface waters. And you might say, well, so what? And actually I should say that the levels are very low. They're not exceeding the EQS values in many cases where there are environmental quality standards, but they're still there. We did a watch list monitoring program with the Environmental Protection Agency over those periods 2021, 2018 to 2020, 2021. And we're seeing again occurrence frequency. And interestingly, I suppose, during COVID, we saw an increase in venlafaxine, which is an antidepressant medicine, and we saw the increase in that, the widespread occurrence in that across the country, but also particularly in the River Liffey. But you can see others also, fungicides, medical fungicides, both from agriculture and from human use, azole compounds widely present, and also antibiotics. And antibiotics are important because of the implication in relation to antimicrobial resistance. So seeing them there is one thing, but understanding what they're doing in terms of the resistance is very important. Just to point out what we were particularly finding in the Liffey during these periods, and I suppose giving it a level of risk, were some of these here at moderate risk, again, venlafaxine and azithromycin, some of these widely used chemicals. We see, again, the data from the River Liffey, sulfamethoxazole is coming up repeatedly. And in the Liffey, comparing with the Suir, the Annalee and the River Nore, we see during the COVID period an increase in overall pharmaceutical occurrence and then a drop-off afterwards. Again, these are comparisons and temporal variations of antibiotics. Over the period of time, you can see increase, levelling off. And this data is just kind of spot samples, so it would be great to see more of the same happening. Here you can see accumulated total concentrations, seeing some increase around 2021 and then dropping some increase from 2020 to 21 and levelling off. Looking at pesticide occurrences, we don't expect, I suppose, to see a lot of pesticides within our wastewater treatment plant influent. We are measuring them. And if we want to look at urban sites, we can see the green bars. We're seeing lots of the pesticides that we're measuring, again, occurring within our wastewater treatment plant and entering our receiving waters. So again, land use of pesticides, household use of pesticides, especially important when you're talking about these kind of misconnections, stormwater overflows, this kind of thing, road runoff. Where are they going? They're all coming together into the rivers. This is a study that we did over the course of 12 months where we looked at a whole suite of personal care products, pharmaceuticals, in urban areas, and we compared it also with rural areas, and you can see that we are getting all of these chemicals occurring at a range of concentrations over a 12-month period. Some you will have a wider spread, and some will stay around the same levels. This is published data. If anybody's interested, and I can give it to you. Just very quickly to show you why it's important, even if these are occurring, because remember, I am saying that they're not at levels that are above regulatory values. But why is it still important? Just to show some effects that we have measured, where you have the cocktail effect, where, for example, you might have diclofenac present and gemfibrozil, that we're getting anti-estrogenic effects when we test it in our lab. Similarly, if we look at sulfamethoxazole, which very often appears with trimethoprim, and we add in diclofenac, you can see a different biological response. Looking at the beautiful organism Daphnia, which we really like to study, we looked at reproduction and heart rate, and interestingly, when there's venlafaxine present, the reproduction decreases. The brood number is affected, and also the brood size is affected. If we look at also the heart rate, we know that metformin causes a decrease, venlafaxine causes it to increase, sulfamethoxazole causes it to decrease. So even at very low concentrations, we're focusing down at PNEC values, predicted no effect concentrations of these chemicals are having an impact. The last topic, just if I have time, to look at PFAS. It's highly topical, and I really think it's something we need to be fully aware of. PFAS, these are perfluorinated chemicals. There's over 4,700 of these according to the OECD, and they're absolutely everywhere. They're in everything that we have at home, our cookware, what we wear, the surfaces of our seats, and protective coatings. They're in firefighting foams. They're linked with the digital industry, silicon industry. There's lots and lots of sources of these chemicals. And they are connected with very serious health concerns. So we did a study. We're continuing to work on this. We now have a 4-year project underway, but we have been working on this for a number of years. And we've been looking at both long chain. So these perfluorinated chemicals are carbon-fluorine chain compounds. So the kind of parent compounds, would have longer chains, but some of the replacement chemicals are shorter because companies are very smart in terms of finding replacements, and also some of the breakdown products will also be smaller, be shorter. So we looked at a range of chain lengths from C12 down to C4. We looked at the River Liffey. We've looked at other locations, but just for the perspective of today. And we're actually going out tomorrow to particularly focus on areas below the Phoenix Park, because we're seeing chemicals here that are not appearing in any of the regulations, any of the legislation, and we're seeing them at quite high concentrations. So we want to try and find what the source of these chemicals are. We just took quite an array of different sites to sample. The chemicals that are coming up, there's about 8 compounds from the 15 that we've measured. It's only a target method. There's 8 that are coming up all the time. There are some that aren't detected. PFAS, interestingly, wasn't, which is the regulated one. But some of these others, this undecanoic acid, PFUDA, is appearing as well. So we're looking at studies that will try to source where they're coming from. The guidelines that we're dealing with is European drinking water standards, Australian limits, and surface water standards. And our results in terms of total PFAS are exceeding those guidelines in what we're seeing in surface waters. What we're trying to do with this, and this I suppose is very important in terms of trying to hone in on where the sources of some of these chemicals are so that they can be replaced or removed. And there's a lot of activity in Europe now to actively remove chemicals from use. It's very hard to remove 4,700 plus chemicals from use, but some key chemicals that are associated with severe health effects are being currently removed from use. So we're looking at increasing our sample locations, looking at hydrological distances, finding dilution, and then specifically looking at potential sources. So looking at some statistical representations. If we look at the sites where we measured, you can see higher levels obviously down in Dublin Bay, excuse me, and some up further around Lucan. And there's also here in this upper area, up around Selbridge, and then particularly around this area here, we're particularly interested because there's quite a lot of what is shown here as stormwater overflows, but we need to understand better what they actually are, because we can see, the highest incidence of PFAS compounds occurring within that region. So there's more of these inputs into the river, into the Liffey, in that particular area, and we're getting higher levels of PFAS in that particular area, but we don't know why. So if you have any insight, it'd be really welcome. So that's my last point. There are many chemicals that we should be aware of. A key part of how we manage them is through wastewater treatment plants and improving the wastewater treatment treatment process. But critically, stormwater overflows is very important. As usual, I have not done any of this work. It's my postdocs, my research assistants. I get to talk about it. I have great collaborators working with ARUP, also with Agilent Technologies, and very bright researchers. And this work has been funded by the Marine Institute and the Environmental Protection Agency. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Fiona. It's interesting how we live our lives. We need chemicals. Our next speaker is Professor Wim Meyer, Professor of Microbiology and Director of the MSc Biotechnology Programme at UCD, University College Dublin. Great to have you here, Wim. Thanks for coming. And I'm going to hand over to you. It's okay?
All right. Well, is this okay? A bit taller. Okay. All right. It's perfect, yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to talk to you about our project, Acclimatize, which is relevant to both the coastal areas, so Dublin Bay, and the catchments, so the small streams, rivers that are of particular interest to this project. Acclimatize is a project that ended in June. It was funded by the European Union under the Interreg program, and it's a collaboration between University College Dublin and Aberystwyth University in Wales. And as you can see from the number of logos below, with participation of a large number of local authorities, including Dún Laoghaire, Dublin City Council, and with whom we collaborated closely, as well as Fingal County Council and Irish Water. I will start off with thanking people. So just like Fiona said, it's not us in the field, it's other people. I coordinate and get the money, amongst other things. So there's a large number of people. So these are the principal investigators. We have different types of skills. So I'm a microbiologist, molecular biologist, and so on. John O'Sullivan is a civil engineer. And Greg is a computer scientist, and Bart Masterson is probably many of you know him, also a molecular biologist and a microbiologist. And then on the Welsh side, we collaborated with David Kay's group. Anybody involved in water would know him quite well. And then, of course, we would like to thank Breda as program development officer, and then these are the staff, so postdocs, research assistants, and PhD students who went out in the field, as well as lots of undergraduate students. Now, Acclimatize had several aims, and I'm only going to talk about some of these. So in Ireland, we focused on urban bathing waters, so that is Dublin Bay in particular. And you can see the number of beaches there, so Marianstrand, Sandymount, Dollymount, but also some bathing waters in Fingal. Whereas in Wales, we focus more on the agricultural sizes. Now, there are two main aspects of acclimatize. I only will talk about one of them. So there is the now and there is the future. The now is pollution, and I'm talking predominantly about fecal contamination. So where does it come from, who is contributing, and how much, and what can we do about this? And then the future aspect is climate change. So we looked at that as well, but I won't talk about that today. Now, there are several work packages, so it was in two phases. I will focus on the blue ones here. So the blue ones deal with collecting data on in Dublin Bay itself, on the beaches, in the catchments. We're trying to figure out who is contributing, how much are people the things contributing. And then in phase two, as you can see, we look into the catchments in far more detail. Again, the origin of contamination, how much, and where does it go? Now, there are some related activities which we do. We're very much interested in antimicrobial resistance, so I will briefly talk about that in a second. Then we have the National Wastewater Surveillance Program, so that has been running now for 4 years, funded by the Health Service Executive. So that deals with looking at the influence of wastewater treatment plants, and we are characterizing and quantifying pathogenic viruses. So that is something that will become mandatory under the revised Urban Wastewater Directive. So Ireland is actually doing this. So this is nationwide. And then we do a routine source tracking analysis for local authorities, as many of you know. And okay, so this was very intensive. So we had people in the field. So both in the catchments as well on the water, and these were long days. Usually we measure through tidal cycles, so people are out for a long time both in the lab and in the field. And what do we want? We want to measure total fecal contamination. We want to identify the biological sources. We want to instrument rivers and streams to be able to quantify these things. Then that leads to microbial source apportionment, which meaning how much is coming from where, by whom. And then finally, we want to model. So we want to look at connectivity. If you release something somewhere, where does it go? Because that is equally important as determining the source. Now, how do we do this? So this is the Dublin Bay sampling program. We had a number of clusters, which you can see here in different colors, and each cluster has 4 sites, and these 4 sites were measured through a tidal cycle of 12 hours, sampling every half hour under various conditions, so dry conditions, wet conditions, neap and spring. So that was an enormous amount of work, and then we measure various things like that indicate total pollution, like E. coli, enterococci, phages, and so on. Source tracking, which determines the biological source, and then physical parameters, including salinity, pH, and also with the ADCP, looking at the current in the sea. So fairly intense. And then we have instrumentation. So if we have things like flow gauges, auto samplers, and that allows us to create a fairly detailed picture of what's going on in a catchment. And then, as I mentioned, in the sea, we had ADCPs, so both short-term, which we lower to the sea floor on the day itself, so during a 12-hour sampling. But we also, in these yellow buoys, we had longer, several month deployments, and that allowed us to look for to determine the flow of water, if you like. Now, then there is the information on bathymetry, so that is let's say the shape of the coastal areas. So we had various inputs, and that type of information then leads to a model where we can look at the hydrodynamics. So this is how water flows. So you can see that the tides go in and out, and as you look in the further away from the shore, you see that it nicely goes up and down. But then if we look in Dublin Bay itself, you see that the things become much more complex. And that is where, of course, we're interested in, especially near shore. Okay, so if you look at that, then we can look at how E. coli would behave. So this is based on actual measurements. So these samples in the sea. And then we can see plumes. So we can see plumes coming out from the Liffey itself, and then lower you see the areas of Sandymount and Marion where you have small streams discharging. So plumes are moving in and out, and that will give us some idea of what's happening to pollution once it gets into the stream. Now you can do this in much higher resolution by simulating particles as they are released. So imagine that you have a release of particles coming from the let's say the Liffey, and you ask yourself what happens to it based on our measurements of water movement and so on. And then you can see that as the particles are released, they come into Dublin Bay, and then they swing northwards. So they go around Howth and then go as far as Portmarnock. And what you see very clearly here is that these particles, i.e. the pollution, does not really affect the southern part of the bay. So it doesn't go to Sandymount and Marion and so on. Okay, so what happens then in closer to the shore in Sandymount and Marion Strand? Okay, so you can do the same thing, and we've done many of them. I'm just showing a few of these. So this is a release from the Elm Park stream. The Elm Park stream discharges onto Marion Strand, takes a left turn, and then goes straight onto Sandymount. So this is what happens with that release. And now you see that the particles are released, but they're not really escaping at all. So they're being pushed back towards the Sandymount and Marion Strand, and are not really moving away. So that would indicate that pollution in Marion and Sandymount Strand is a nearshore effect rather than an offshore effect, and also that the water quality in Sandymount and Marion is not really affected by the Ringsend treatment plant, whereas on the northern side it might be a different story. Okay, so if that's the case, fine. Can we see this actually in real measurements? We can, because it turns out that the deeper you go, the cleaner the water gets, which is probably as one would expect. So the offshore water quality in Dublin Bay, so in the bay itself, the water quality is usually very good, or even excellent. In some cases, we couldn't measure fecal indicator bacteria at all, much to the disappointment of our staff in the lab, because you get negative results. Okay, then, so let's go closer to shore. So what do? We do transect studies. So we do two types of transect studies. On the left-hand side, you see 30-minute transect. This is going through a tidal cycle, measuring every half hour, and then because the water recedes quite significantly, you see that the sampling points are going further and further out. So that's on the left-hand side. These are the 12-hour transects. The second type of transects we did is quick transects. So within an hour, we race through from the shore to the deep end, and then also measure and see what's happening. Now you can already see from the colors that the further you get away from the shore, the better it gets. So green is good, and red is bad, as it usually is. So this type of analysis will give us more information what is happening to the near shore. Okay, let's look at this. So these are the 12-hour transects, taking samples every half hour during a day. And you can see that there is huge variation. So we measure E. coli, intestinal enterococci, and also somatic coliphages. At the bottom, you see the daily variability in box plots. So this is a single day. And you see that you get a variation of 1 to 2 orders of magnitude within the day itself, which, if you think about this, is not all that surprising. But nevertheless, there is a huge variation. So taking a single sample somewhere in the sea or in the coastal is usually not telling you all that much. So coastal parts are important. So what's happening near shore then? Well, people have already alluded to various potential sources. So you have birds, and you have dogs, and you have gulls. If you go to Fingal, there's also horses and ruminant. But in Dublin Bay, it's predominantly these three. So this is one of these transects where we move out fairly rapidly. So we go from the beach and then move as quickly as we possibly can towards the deep end. So that's what you see here in these graphs. So the distance is coming from the shore to 2 kilometers out. And you see that as you are moving out, you see in the top graph that the pollution increases very sharply and then decreases. So this is indicated by in the E. coli, intestinal enterococci, and coliphages. Then at the bottom graph, you see the depth. And you see that as there is an increase in pollution, the depth decreases, i.e. you're looking at a sandbank. And then we do a thing called microbial source tracking, so we can differentiate between biological sources. And where there is a peak in pollution, you see a peak in bird pollution. So that is what the middle graph indicates. And that's quite significant. That's about 2,800 CFUs per 100 mils. So that is enough to fail a sample. So birds contribute. How much do they contribute? Because this is just locally. Well, we have info on this. We know how many birds are there, and it changes through the seasons because lots of them are migratory birds. We're dealing with the UNESCO biosphere. Now, we have determined how many E. coli and how many enterococci there are present in bird poo. So this is not literature, this is actually what we did. So we chased bird poo, measured into the lab, and then, so this is actual data. Don't worry, it gets more gross in a moment. But if you do this, you know how many birds, you know how often a bird is pooing, so therefore you can calculate loading. And that means that if you would express this as CFUs per 100 mils, it would mean that towards the end of the season, it would get enough, assuming homogeneous distribution, that yes, it could create a problem, a little problem, but then, nevertheless. How about dogs? Well, Sandymount and Marion are extremely popular with dog walkers, as we all know. And the numbers actually even baffled me because I thought maybe 10 or 20. No. On a single day, you can get over 200 dogs on the beach. Then you ask yourself, where are the dog poos? Well, imagine you have a team of people going onto the beach with the GPS in their hands and mapping the dog poos, right? That's what you see there. All these yellow dots is a single event, as we would like to call it. Now, is that a problem? Well, again, we measured E. coli and enterococci in Irish dog poo, so I can tell you the weight of the average dog poo in a small dog and in a big dog, and also how many E. coli and enterococci. Very yucky. However, it will tell you the loadings, and that will tell you that there is a problem. So this is enough to fail a beach. And if this is indeed the case, so as I mentioned, we are measuring water samples for local authorities quite regularly with source tracking. There are a large number of samples that have very high E. coli and enterococci levels in it. We can't detect human marker, we can't detect the gull marker, but the dog marker is going through the roof. So the other thing is, all of these dogs do their business very close to shore, almost on top of the compliance point. So it can create problems. However, you know, and we did a huge campaign, so leave only paw prints. We had an animation, and it was covered by about 80 newspaper articles and interviews, so just to make the public aware. However, we can't just point our fingers to gulls and dogs, because what about the catchments? Now, this is what you see here are the outfalls of two small streams, the Trimleston stream and the Elm Park stream. And in the top levels, you see DMC, SMC, MNC. These are the E. coli levels over a 2-year or 3-year period where we measure fairly regularly. And you see that the levels in these streams vary quite significantly over several orders of magnitude. But in the red and in the blue arrows, you see the levels in the Elm Park stream and the Trimleston stream. And you see that these are very, very high, or can be very high, up to about 500,000 per 100 mils. What is the source of this? Well, again, we have our molecular markers. In the Elm Park stream and Trimleston stream, it is almost exclusively human. So at stages, it's almost like there's raw sewage coming through these streams. So that brings us then to like this is just to make sure that there is a correlation. So what you see on this graph in the human source tracking marker on the x-axis, and the total E. coli on the y-axis. If there is a correlation, you would expect a straight line. So as the human marker increases in concentration, so do the levels of E. coli. So it's what you basically would expect. So we can do loadings from the streams and rivers. We have the flow rates. So we know how much is discharged per hour. So now we can do a source apportionment. So we can do it on the various conditions. So if we do look at the mean daily values, you see that in blue that the E. coli and enterococci are predominantly delivered by the streams. Under maximum conditions, dogs might be, could be 1/3, but it still is the truth that the Elm Park stream and the Trimbleston, predominantly the Elm Park stream, is delivering most of that on that beach, which is not surprising because it discharges right on top of Marianstrand and then, as I said, takes a left onto Sandymount. So what about the Elm Park stream? Well, the Elm Park stream is very convenient for us because it runs right over our campus. Estates is not so happy with it because there might be pollution coming from UCD itself, but that's a different story. So anyway, so we worked very closely with Dunleary County Council, with Paul and with Kevin Callanan in Dublin City Council to analyze this in great detail. And what you see here are the sampling stations. So in the map, the sampling stations in the Elm Park stream. It's a very small stream, but very, very, very polluted. So we measure at many different locations and its small tributaries. And then on the bottom graphs, E. coli and enterococci, you see the range of pollution. And you see that it goes down to very low levels to extremely high levels, approaching 500,000 per 100 mils for E. coli and enterococci. And then the HF183 marker, which is the human source tracking marker we use, it fluctuates like that as well. So when the pollution goes up, so does the marker. Now you can then take this and you can analyze this catchment in great detail. So on the right two graphs is like an underground, a tube map of the catchment. So you go from left to right, so that is towards the sea. So EP1 is the sea, if you like, so the discharge point, and then you can measure all along. And what you can see is that there is a point. And let me see here, laser pointer here. So if you go through this, you see that from here to here, you see that the levels of pollution suddenly shoot up and then remain quite high, whereas the tributaries don't really contribute that much. So this is for E. coli, so it's a direction of flow. For the human marker, we see the same thing. The human marker spikes up and then remains fairly high. The tributaries don't really contribute to that much. So that indicates that at very much in the beginning, there is a source of pollution that is contributing. And indeed, there's a combined sewage overflow right there. Now, what about weather events? So we have auto-samplers, so we can fire them at will. So that means a rain event will come in, and we then start sampling every half hour and measure what's going on in that stream and ask ourselves, is there a connection between rain events and what's happening in this small stream? And of course, yes, there is. So there are things that you can measure here. So you have the rain event, so that is here, so in black. So you see that the flow goes up and down. And then you see the indicator of organisms, E. coli and enterococci, responding fairly rapidly for these two sites, and not so much for this one. So these two sites are very responsive to weather events. Now, we measured a whole lot of other things. And again, this is in close collaboration with Dunleary County Council and Dublin City Council. The labs of DCC measured things like ammonia and so. So you can see that ammonia is responding equally well. So that would indicate that ammonia in this particular catchment might be a good surrogate to see what's going on. Okay, so that is pollution in the catchment from fecal contamination. I want to briefly talk about one other type of contamination which is important, moving from the small stream to a big stream, and that's antimicrobial resistance. So as part of our project, we looked at what happens when rivers flow from their source in the Wicklow Mountains all the way down to the sea. And as they do so, they move from an area which is quite pristine, so not much going on, through an agricultural area, entering Dublin City and then discharging into the sea. And we are interested in antimicrobial resistance genes. So Fiona mentioned the AMR residues itself, the antimicrobials. We're looking at the resistance, and of course these two things are closely related. So what can you do? So we take water samples, we concentrate this from 10 liters or more to eventually 50 or 100 microliters. This by itself is an enormous amount of work, by the way. So we take samples. Here you see Neve at the source of the Liffey in the Wicklow Mountains. And then you can extract all the DNA, sequence everything, it's called a metagenome, and then ask yourself, well, what's in it? So the questions we asked is what happens to this stream as it moves through the countryside. So like you see here, so you have the Liffey going through an agricultural area and then entering Dublin City, and then the Dodder the same way. So you can sample here in pristine area and then move to an agricultural areas and then look into the city. And this is what you see. So this is again an underground map of the area. So this is the sources. So this is the pristine area, and there's just a few animals running around. Nobody lives there, as you know. Then the Liffey will go its route through the agricultural area, same like the Dodder. And you can see that the resistome is changing. So these are the genes that are making bacteria resistant. And you see that they are changing. Now the interesting bit here is that the samples in the Dublin city itself are more similar to a wastewater treatment plant than they are to the upstream areas. So that means that as water is flowing through the Dublin city area, they take on wastewater, and that will change it. The most interesting bit here is that the genes that are particularly coming up are genes that are encoding resistance to disinfectants, so household disinfectants. So if you look at the relationship, these are the samples from the two rivers. This is the Dublin wastewater treatment plant, and you see they are closely related. So what we do certainly has an effect on the on the river quality. Okay, so the bunch of conclusions. I didn't talk about the bottom one, but the main thing here is that the fecal indicators in waters are not homogeneously distributed. That the poor water in Dublin Bay, the southern part, is caused by nearshore events. We have dogs, gulls, and humans being responsible, but it is largely the small streams that are discharging onto Marienstand and Sandymount. Now, these sources are localized. They can be very, very high. Now, we've identified one of them that has been rectified, but there is a lot of additional pollution coming into these streams, which is why the Acclimatize project is fortunately continuing for another 4 years as Acclimatize 2. So the fun continues. Okay, so this is our team. And then thank you very much.
Thank you, Wim. That's brilliant. I want that model as a screensaver, but I might not get too much work done then. I just stare at that Dublin Bay model. It's fantastic. It's great to see real data for places we live in. Our next speaker is Lorraine Byrne, environmental scientist and project coordinator with the Dublin Urban Rivers Life project. And I'm going to pass it over to you now, Lorraine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's very important as a project coordinator to know, to preempt things. So I preempted that we were going to run over, so I've kept this really short slide. And also to know what's important to people, and I know lunch is very important to people and it's looming. So I'm going to fly through this, and I've kept it short for that purpose. Okay, so all of our door-to-door assessment work, just to, I suppose, put into context where we're talking about. We're talking about the Griffin catchment and also the Carrick Mines catchment. And if you can see there with my pointer. So we're talking about here in purple is the Griffin catchment, and there's 28 subcatchments in this. So we're talking about over 14,000 houses, and then also this is the Carrick Mines catchment. And this has over, the Griffin is over 13,000 houses and the Carrick Mines is over 14,000 houses. No, the other way around. And the Carrick Mines catchment, it has 83 subcatchments, and the Griffin is 28. So a subcatchment is literally the amount of houses in an estate that are going to a particular pipe. So it's just that there's larger subcatchments in the Griffin catchment. So the project, the aim on the door-to-door side was to do 12,000 door-to-door assessments and to remove at source 960 misconnections. So with those targets, we knew that the emphasis at the very outset had to be on engagement with members of the public and bringing them on board. And that was mentioned earlier on with Lauren and the stormwater assessors. And that was our, I suppose, all of our communication side was focused on that through our social media posts, our website, all of our correspondence that we issued in writing, and also through our Green Estate demonstrations. And that's where we actively met with members of the public, tried to get them out on their green and demonstrated what a misconnection looks like. And again, we've talked about the polluter pays, and the homeowner is responsible for the repair of their misconnection at their cost. So really we had to sell the message of their local river and the importance of that. And it worked because we got into over 6,600 houses. So the value of people's local river has really, is really evident. And Lauren mentioned there with regard to how we identified the assessments to do. Well, we identified where the pipes were dirty, where there was pollution in the manholes, and then we screened those manholes. We identified which was clean and which was dirty, and we screened over 17,000 stormwater drainage checks. So what did we identify? We've identified over 1,044 misconnected appliances, and 86% of those have been repaired to date. So that's source removal of that amount of pollution. And we can see it already at the stormwater outfalls. Here's an image of the before we started our work on the door-to-door assessments, and here's one at the end. So you can see there's a clear difference there with regard to the colour of the discharge and even the weed growth. And that's quite evident at a number of our stormwater outfalls. And then the evidence at the stormwater outfalls in relation to the discharge, there's quite a lot of data. We have monitored specific subcatchments since the start of the project, so we've a lot of data on those. And unfortunately, apologies, it's not that clear, but you can see the number of monitoring occasions, and you can see the clear downward trend in the pollution. And this one is for ammonia, and it's at one of the Griffin stormwater outfalls. And the next one then is for ammonia also, and it's one of the Carrick mines. And they're one of our larger subcatchments. In the Griffin, the previous slide referred to a subcatchment that was over 2,500 houses. And the same with the Carrick mines. These are one of the larger subcatchments we're focusing on. And we've very robust data to see the downward trend in pollution coming from those outfalls. Okay, so at the start of the project, we weren't sure when we were going into subcatchments what was the percentage of misconnections. We'd heard from previous work, 8%, that was kind of the most common percentage identified, but from literature studies that we had done, it really ranged, and occasionally we heard hotspots of kind of 15 to 20%. But what we've actually identified that, I suppose to explain the graph, we have the first set on the bar chart is 1 to 5, so there's 1 to 5%. There's more common to have the lower percentage in the Carrick mine stream, but that's because they have a relatively larger amount of newer estates in those, so therefore the lower percentage were evident there. You can see the most common percentage was between the 5 and 10%, so the 8% does hold true in the main for subcatchments. But we've also had quite a few between the 10 to 15%. And then in the Griffin, because it's an older estate, we actually had estates with misconnection percentages up to 40% in some estates. So there were a number of estates with high hotspots of misconnection percentages. And this graph really just tells us we've done a large amount of socioeconomic data analysis, and this one really tells us on the age of the houses in the estate. So you can see pre-1970s, 8%, Up to 1980, there's 12.3% misconnection rate identified, and then up to 1990, we had a 12% misconnection rate identified on those bands of houses. While the majority of houses that we assessed, we've gone into over 3,121 houses in the graphene between the 91 and the 2000 age group, the percentage of misconnections has dropped and continues to drop as the age of the houses increases. Okay, so what did we find that was misconnected? Again, there was some preliminary studies done on small numbers of catchments prior to starting this work, and we had some percentages for the amount of appliances actually identified as misconnected. So we've identified that 34% of washing machines, 33% of sinks, and 24% of dishwashers are misconnected. So 92% of misconnections regard those three appliances. And that's around 350 misconnected washing machines that we've identified, 347 misconnected sinks, and 252 misconnected dishwashers. And we've also identified 64 misconnected showers and 32 misconnected toilets. And those figures are important when we go further on in the slides. And I suppose then the question is, where are those misconnections and what's the kind of breakdown in relation to those appliances? So we categorise our misconnections in three locations. In extensions, in the original build where there may have been a modification, and also in an outbuilding. So generally that refers to the small garden shed, or most commonly where we've identified is where there was an old boiler house. And in those, in extensions, the most common misconnected appliance is actually kitchen sinks. In the original build, it's washing machines. And as I suppose we predicted in outbuildings in the boiler house, it's the washing machine that's the most common misconnected appliance. And with regard to the work on the repairs, so 86% of misconnections have been repaired. 53% of those have been done by DIY and family help. And in relation to, I suppose, the breakdown there, the second graph that I have, it shows the average cost. DIY is the cheapest, and average cost coming in, and family help is also quite cheap. So the medium cost for family help is €37, and we have lots of data on that. And then, I suppose, what does this mean in terms of the wastewater, the at-source removal? So what we have identified as misconnected, that equates to 47,000 litres of wastewater going into the two catchments, into the Carrick Mines and the Griffin catchment. And when I was saying earlier on, the amount of appliances, we've 32 toilets misconnected, and you can see the amount of wastewater because obviously we were working on data that we had gleaned through our own previous work in South Dublin County Council, but also through literature values, and we're able to see that washing machines and kitchen sinks, the amount of wastewater that's discharged. And when you equate that, when you bring that per year, so that 47,000 litres per day is actually 14.8 million litres of wastewater that will be removed when we have completed all our project work from the two subcatchments. So at present, we have removed 13 million litres of wastewater from the Carrick Mines and the Griffin catchment from the repairs that have been done. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorraine. Now, if I could ask Vim and Fiona to come back up. And Lorraine, if you want to sit on the far side. We're just going to take a few questions. Don't want hangry people attacking me or anything like that. Do we have any questions from the floor? We do. We have a keen person up there. Hiya, Paul. Okay, just for our online audience, are there treatment processes that we can bolt on to wastewater treatment systems, municipal wastewater treatment systems, that will treat some of these chemicals, Fiona, that you were speaking of?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, there are processes. There's a lot of work going on in this space, and There was a recent conference, a tech conference that focused specifically on that. Membrane technologies are really playing a huge role. Photocatalysis technologies, which, these can be modular systems that can be added in. Particularly, we're going to see that where the agglomeration, 100,000 agglomerations are going to have to step up to remove these micropollutants. But yes, there are technologies. They haven't been tested all that much. And I think one of the gaps that you'll find if you talk to water utilities and water technology producers is that there isn't a good link in terms of opportunities to test technologies. But there's a lot happening, yeah.
Anybody else? Vim, I have a question for you. Can we make decisions, having looked at the information you're gathering, can we make decisions, real decisions that have good economic outcomes in terms of investment with a good outcome without research? I know your answer, but I need you to tell me because it seems very important.
Well, you can make decisions. I'm not sure if they're going to be good ones. See, the problem is that in many cases things are counterintuitive. Like the Ringsend wastewater treatment plant in Dublin Bay is a case in point. If you ask any of the locals, they would point a finger and say that's your main source, which might be true for the northern part, although it goes by Dollymount as well. But for Sandymount and Marienstrand, the main sources are clearly different. So if you would invest a lot of things based on your gut feeling, you probably end up with the wrong conclusion. And the other thing is things like dogs and so on. It is a very easy solution to do something about it. It's just clean up after your dog. It's only it doesn't take much effort. But yeah, in general, you need the info to make proper evidence-based decisions.
That's what I thought looking at the information. It's not what you think it is sometimes. Lorraine, is there any other question from the audience, or am I hogging it? Lorraine, just in terms of the volumes you mentioned, are they based on usage and information about the appliances and that?
Thank you, Richard. Yes, they are. We've identified the usage from literature values and also some work that was done in the water pollution section. Previously, we were able to identify volumes coming from appliances. And so generally with regard to a washing machine, literature values and regulatory requirements identify, the usage, the water consumption over that period of time. So generally they say a washing machine is used 220 times a year, and similar values and information are available for dishwashers as well.
That's great. So it provides a volumetric basis for making those assumptions. Still no brave souls from our audience. So Fiona, I have one question from you. It's unlikely we'll remove some of those chemicals, and as you said, they're not of extreme high values, or they're pretty low values. But is it important to keep monitoring to catch the ones that are either high concentrations or are new products onto the market? Because it seems like there's a hell of a lot of new products introduced onto the market every year.
Yeah, I think monitoring is the only way that we can actually influence policy and management of chemicals. Up until fairly recently, we weren't aware of pharmaceutical burden on surface waters, and particularly where we have learned about the impact on biodiversity that has come to the fore. We've no idea of impact on human health, really, in chronic human health. So monitoring is the only way that we can actually get a handle on this. I think the PFAS question is really something that we haven't considered at all, and it's quite a significant problem. I think it's going to become quite an important one over the next while, and we are going to see the importance of monitoring in terms of removing certain chemicals from use, and I think Ireland really needs to play a role in relation to that.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. I think it's time for lunch. I want to thank Fiona, Vim and Lorraine for their really excellent presentations and very insightful. If you could show your appreciation, please. That's great.